So imagine leaving the front door of your apartment just wide open for
Oh,
months.
wow. That sounds like a terrible idea.
Right. Just completely unlocked, swinging in the breeze.
Yeah, you're basically asking for trouble at that point.
Exactly. And, eventually the wind blows and some autumn leaves, maybe some dust. But then an uninvited guest simply wanders in.
Okay.
They look around your empty living room, decide the lighting is fantastic, and without even asking, they start completely redecorating the place to their own
I
taste.
mean, most of us would be furious. We would want to evict them immediately.
Oh, absolutely. But what if right before you kicked them out, you took a second look and realized their design was actually, like, structurally brilliant?
That is a really disarming scenario
Mm,
because we are so conditioned to protect our empty spaces.
right.
We want to be the ones who decide what fills them.
Yeah, we want control.
Exactly. When something else claims that space, our instinct is to just label it an invasion,
Mm.
regardless of the actual merit of what's happening.
And that tension, that exact tension between what we want to control and what nature just decides to do anyway, that is the core of our deep dive today.
That's a great topic.
Yeah. So we are looking at a highly observational piece of writing. It's from May 27th, 2026, by a writer named Eng.
Right.
It's basically a single blog entry titled Notes on Gardening, Part 907, and it's subtitled A Second Look at the Sensitive Plant. And the scientific name for this plant is Mimosa pudica.
Yes, the Mimosa pudica.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to take these very limited, hyper-focused observations Aang makes about a tiny balcony garden and, unpack the mechanisms behind how life actually adapts when its back is against the wall.
Which is just endlessly fascinating.
It really is. We're going to explore the biology of survival, the mechanics of forced growth, and how just the simple act of isolating an annoyance can completely alter our perception of its value.
You know, Aang's post is a fantastic starting point, specifically because of its constraint. It forces us to look incredibly closely at a microscopic battleground.
Right. It's very contained.
Yeah, we aren't analyzing a sprawling forest or like a complex agricultural system. We're literally just looking at a few isolated flower pots on a balcony.
So let's establish the timeline for you, the listener. Aang left these few flower pots sitting out on a balcony, and they described the pots as sitting there for, quote, moons.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, it's a beautiful kind of passive measurement of time. So the pots are just dormant, empty dirt waiting for a purpose. And during those passing moons, the wind acts as this random delivery mechanism, bringing in wild seeds.
Just blowing whatever's in the air right into the dirt.
Exactly. And the most successful of these arrivals is the Mimosa pudica, and it just completely overtakes these pots.
Well, the passive weighting of the soil, contrasted with the opportunistic arrival of the seed, that is a fundamental rule of biology. A void is never static.
Nature hates a vacuum, right?
Precisely. If there is unexploited real estate, in this case soil, with access to precipitation and sunlight, the environment is going to attempt to fill it. And the wind is entirely indifferent. It distributes thousands of seeds across concrete, asphalt, rooftops, where they will simply perish.
Right, just totally waste effort for most of them.
But a seed is essentially a biological lottery ticket, and Aang's empty pot was the jackpot.
So Aang notes that the Mimosa pudica is considered an invasive plant, and it seems its primary weapon is sheer adaptability.
Yeah, it's incredibly robust.
A post mentions it thrives in almost any soil. But here's the detail that really caught my attention. Aang took a closer look and realized that even the absolute smallest plants,
The one's just sprouting.
yeah, the tiny ones barely visible on the surface of the dirt, they had already sent long, deep roots entirely through the pot. The base was fully established before the plant even looked like it was trying to grow.
Wow. That observation really reveals the complex biological calculus happening beneath the soil.
How so?
Well, we often think of a seed as just, a tiny plant waiting to get bigger. But it is actually a highly pressurized, finite battery of energy.
Like it only has so much fuel in the tank?
Exactly. When that seed cracks open, it faces a critical choice regarding energy allocation. It has a very limited budget to establish itself before it dies.
Okay, I'm going to challenge the framing of this, though.
All right, let's hear it.
Because a lot of writing around this kind of botanical behavior calls it a marvel of resilience, right?
Sure.
But I look at a tiny plant aggressively sinking massive taproots all the way to the bottom of a pot, and I wonder if that is really resilience or if it is just like biological bullying.
Biological bullying.
That's,
You know,
I mean, it feels like resource hoarding. It is sinking those roots deep so that it can suck up all the moisture at the base of the pot, effectively starving out any other seed that might have landed next to it.
that is a very human way to moralize a biological imperative.
Fair enough.
But your mechanical assessment is totally accurate. To a botanist, what you call hoarding and what someone else calls resilience are the exact same mechanism. The plant is securing a monopoly on the local resource.
But it's taking everything for itself.
But let's look at the physics of what it's actually accomplishing. Pushing a root tip through compacted, dry, or nutrient-poor soil requires immense mechanical force.
It's hard work.
It is brutal work. The seedling is burning through its finite energy reserves to drill downward in complete darkness.
Which is a massive gamble, isn't it? Because while it's spending all that energy drilling down, it isn't.
It isn't building leaves, exactly.
And without leaves, it can't harvest sunlight to make more energy.
It is the ultimate evolutionary gamble. If it spends its entire initial energy budget building a deep root system, and a faster-growing plant next to it throws up a canopy of leaves and blocks the sun.
Oh, then it's game over.
Yeah, our seedling dies in the shade. It has a great foundation, but no solar panels.
Wow.
However, by taking that risk and securing the deep water reserves first, the Mimosa pudica ensures that if a drought hits or if the wind attempts to uproot it, it will survive while the faster-growing plants perish.
So it's playing the long game.
Yes, it establishes an unshakable infrastructure before it worries about visibility.
That makes the term invasive make a lot more sense. It isn't just that it spreads quickly, it's that once it arrives, it structurally embeds itself in a way that makes it nearly impossible to remove.
Yeah, you'd have to destroy the whole pot.
Right. Without tearing up the entire foundation of the pot, you can't get rid of it. It takes ownership of the container from the bottom up.
And that hidden infrastructure is precisely what enables the most shocking observation in Eng's notes.
Because the roots are just the beginning.
Exactly. The deep roots are just the preamble.
Right. Which brings us to the physical posture of the plant above the soil. This is where Eng's preconceived notions are completely dismantled.
It's a really great moment in the post.
So for you listening, think about a plant you are very familiar with. You know its shape, you know how it behaves. Eng writes that, growing up, they knew the sensitive plant strictly as a ground cover.
Right.
It is a plant that is supposed to stay low, spread horizontally across the dirt, and essentially just hug the earth.
Its genetic blueprint is optimized for lateral expansion.
Exactly. But on this specific balcony, in these specific pots, the plants are doing something radically different. Eng notes they are growing remarkably upright.
Yes.
They are reaching heights of 0.5 meter to a full meter tall. We're talking about a plant that is supposed to be flat against the ground, suddenly stretching up to 3 feet into the air.
It's incredible.
Eng deduces this is a forced adaptation, right?
Oh.
The balcony environment is crowded, so the plants are growing tall to fiercely compete for sunlight.
What is fascinating here is the sheer biological extremity of that transformation.
Yeah, it's wild.
I mean, it is one thing to say a plant is reaching for the light. It is another to consider the structural engineering required for a ground cover to become a meter-tall stalk.
It reminds me of being at a really crowded general admission concert.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Normally, your natural posture is just standing flat on your feet, right?
Yeah.
But if someone taller steps in front of you, blocking your view of the stage, you don't just accept it.
No, you try to see over them.
Exactly. You stand up on your tiptoes. You stretch your spine. You crane your neck. You hold that physically uncomfortable, elongated posture for as long as it takes because your desire to see the show overrides your natural resting state.
Yeah.
The plant is basically standing on its tiptoes.
That is an excellent way to visualize the tension between genetics and environment. In botany, this phenomenon demonstrates what we call phenotypic plasticity.
Phenotypic plasticity.
Right. The DNA of the Mimosa pudica dictates its identity, but its physical expression is highly negotiable based on environmental pressure.
So it can change its shape if it needs to.
Exactly. In an open field with direct, abundant sunlight, spreading horizontally is the safest, most structurally sound way to capture solar energy. It doesn't have to fight gravity.
But the balcony pot is not an open field. It is a tiny, walled-off arena. The lip of the pot casts a shadow. The other invasive seeds that blew in are trying to establish their own leaves. The concert is crowded.
The concert is incredibly crowded, and the lighting is restricted. So the plant initiates a real-time crisis response.
Yep.
It sacrifices the safety of horizontal stability. It diverts its cellular resources to elongate its stems, pushing upward against gravity.
That sounds dangerous for a little plant.
It is. For a plant without a thick, woody trunk, extending a full meter into the air makes it structurally vulnerable. A strong gust of wind could just snap it.
Oh, wow.
But the alternative, staying low and being shaded out by the lip of the pot or competing weeds, is certain death.
So it is choosing the risk of snapping over the certainty of starving.
Exactly.
And that changes the whole dynamic of how we view this organism. Because Aang grew up knowing it as a flat ground figure. To see it stretching 3 feet into the air means the plant's physical identity is not some fixed, immutable trait.
Not at all.
Its identity was entirely dictated by the luxury of space. The moment that space was taken away, the plant proved it was capable of being something completely different.
Which forces us to ask a larger question about how we categorize the natural world, doesn't it? We tend to define living things by their behavior in a vacuum or in their ideal state.
Right, like how they behave when things are easy.
Exactly. But Aang's observation proves that an organism's nature includes its capacity for desperation. The meter-tall stretch is not a mutation. It is a hidden capability unlocked by adversity.
And that incredible display of capability, the massive taproots hiding in the dark and the desperate meter-long stretch for the sun, that triggers the final turning point in Aang's journal entry.
Yes, the shift.
The plant itself stops changing, and the human observing it starts changing.
The shift from eradication to curation.
Yes. Aang originally intended to just harvest these wild, uninvited, sensitive plants. They were invaders, simple as that.
Just weeds to be pulled.
Right. But after observing how aggressively they spread and witnessing this architectural marvel of them stretching upward, Aang decides to pause. They decide to keep a few samples for what they call proper evaluation and propagation.
That phrase, proper evaluation, is incredibly telling.
How so?
Well, it implies an admission of guilt. It suggests that the initial evaluation labeling them merely as a nuisance to be discarded was improper or incomplete.
Aang realizes that if these plants are contained in a single pot, they actually form lovely foliage with quite nice blooms. By the end of the post, Aang is planning to see what can be done with them in the coming weeks.
It's amazing.
The weed has officially become a houseplant.
This really touches on the psychology of why humans garden in the first place and why we harbor such animosity toward weeds.
Yeah, why do we hate weeds so much?
Well, gardening is often an exercise in imposing order on chaos. We buy specific seeds, we map out rows, we dictate what grows where.
We want to be in charge.
Right. A weed is offensive, not necessarily because it is ugly, but because it is insubordinate. It violates our sense of control.
It is the uninvited guest redecorating the living room.
Precisely. The Mimosa pudica offended the intended order of the balcony. But once Aang takes a second look, the context shifts. Aang isolates the plant. By deciding to contain it within a single pot for evaluation, Aang provides a frame for the chaos.
Oh, like putting a frame around a splatter of paint. On the floor, it is a mess. In a frame on the wall, it is modern art.
That isolation is key. When the plant is fighting for its life among a dozen other weeds, it looks chaotic and messy.
Yeah, just a tangle of stems.
But when Aang commits a pot entirely to the Mimosa pudica, the struggle for resources diminishes slightly. The plant can organize itself. And suddenly, the observer is no longer looking at an invasion. They're looking at a botanical specimen.
Wow.
The lovely foliage and the nice blooms were always there, but they were obscured by the human prejudice against how the plant arrived.
Think about what that means for you listening. How often do we define something or someone as a nuisance simply because they arrived in our lives outside of our carefully curated plans?
All the time.
We mislabel an unexpected challenge or an uninvited detour as a weed because it disrupts our schedule. We spend so much energy trying to yank it out of the soil that we never stop to see if the structure it is building might actually be valuable.
The demand for control really blinds us to serendipity. Aang was willing to suspend the desire for control just long enough to let the organism prove its worth.
Which takes a lot of self-awareness.
It does. That requires a significant amount of intellectual humility. It requires looking at the flower pot and admitting, you know what, nature's design might actually be more interesting than the one I had planned.
And it completely reframes the definition of a weed. The plant didn't miraculously change its species to produce nice blooms. It was always going to produce those blooms.
Exactly.
The only thing that changed was the gardener's willingness to grant it the space to exist.
It forces a reevaluation of how we categorize value. The utility of the plant transitioned from being an invasive competitor to becoming an aesthetic contributor, entirely based on the observer's framing.
We have drawn an immense amount of insight from a very brief gardening journal today.
We really have. It's packed with meaning.
It is fascinating how much complex biology and human psychology can play out in just a few inches of potting soil. Let's trace the full arc of what we've unpacked.
Okay, well, we started by examining the opportunism of the natural world. The wind acting as a passive delivery system, depositing pressurized packets of biological potential into dormant, empty spaces.
From there, we looked at the brutal energy economics occurring beneath the soil. The realization that establishing a deep, unshakable root system requires a massive expenditure of finite energy.
Right. Prioritizing invisible infrastructure over above-ground growth to secure a monopoly on resources.
Then we explored the mechanics of phenotypic plasticity. We saw how environmental pressure, like the crowded, shaded reality of a balcony pot, can force a plant genetically predisposed to lay flat against the ground to completely rewrite its structural behavior.
Pushing a full meter into the air in a desperate high-stakes competition for sunlight.
And finally, we unpacked the psychology of the observer. We discussed how isolating an invasive annoyance and providing it with a deliberate frame can transform a chaotic weed into a cultivated subject of beauty.
Revealing lovely blooms that were previously hidden by our own demands for control.
It is a profound micro-study in adaptability, both botanical and human.
It absolutely is. And, as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over, kind of building on the biology we discussed today.
Oh, I love that.
We spent a lot of time analyzing the physical transformation of the sensitive plant. It was a species engineered to be a flat ground cover. It was supposed to stay low, out of the wind, hugging the dirt.
Right.
But when its environment became restricted, when it was starved of the light it needed to survive, it didn't just accept its genetic predisposition. It fought gravity, altered its cellular structure, and stretched a full meter into the air.
Because the environment demanded it.
Exactly. It unlocked a latent capacity it would have never used if it had stayed comfortable in an open field.
That's such a powerful image.
So consider your own environment and your own assumptions about who you are. What traits, behaviors, or limitations have you accepted as your fixed identity?
Oh, wow.
Are you operating as a ground cover simply because you have always had the luxury of wide open space? Or is it possible that your current shape is just a comfortable adaptation to an easy environment?
That's a great question.
If the parameters of your life suddenly changed, if the space became crowded, the resources grew scarce, and you were forced to desperately reach for the light, how tall could you actually stretch?